Bienvenidos. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Table Talk. This is a reimagined series created by and for underrepresented communities. My name is Andy Engel. I'm senior programmer at Reimagine. For anyone who needs a visual description, I'm a white cisgender male, glasses, grayish hair. I've got circles on my shirt and an orange wall behind me. Here's the central question of Table Talk. What does it mean to live and die well, specifically among groups that have been historically marginalized, who experience obstacles to healthy living and dignified dying? Our vision for Table Talk is that it becomes a regular booster shot of knowledge, empathy, cultural humility, and community. While these conversations are by and for underrepresented communities, everyone is invited to these spaces to witness, listen, and learn. Tonight's event will be a 40-minute discussion with our speakers on the topic of grief, which will be followed by Q&A. And when that hour is up, we'll be offering a 10-minute breakout group for discussion or an open space if you've got more questions and you want to continue the conversation. I want to thank our 2021 sponsors of Reimagine. We cannot do this work without your support. I want to particularly highlight the John and Wauna Harmon Foundation for their support of Reimagine's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, which makes Table Talk possible. I also want to thank Sage and Centerlink for helping to spread the word about this Table Talk and the next one. And thank you, Zubin Desai, my colleague, who's helping out with tech on this Table Talk. Next slide, please, Zubin. I wanted to give you a heads up to save the date for our next Table Talk on November 23rd. The focus is on indigenous paradigms of grief, and our guests are Atek Patsinyan, a curandero, a traditional healer, and Jeff Lujan, who is a social worker specializing in hospice care. Both are Chicano, both are two-spirit, so I think this is a nice continuation of some of the ideas and themes that we'll be exploring tonight. And you can register for that at www.letsreimagine.org. And now we can end our slideshow, and now I can really see all of your faces, which is great. Now it's time for me to briefly introduce our speakers, and they're going to get spotlit. Wilfred Labiosa has been a community leader in public health for more than 25 years. He has worked with Latino and LGBTQ+ communities in the United States and Puerto Rico. And he participated in one of our Table Talks last spring. That's how I got to know him. And we're so glad to have you back, Wilfred. Tonight, he is paired with Reverend Dr. Maria Cristina Vlassidis Burgoa. Maria Cristina is settled minister at Star King Unitarian Universalist Church in Hayward, California. Her spirituality is informed by social justice, as well as her backgrounds as a Latinx, immigrant, two-spirit, queer, indigenous person. And you can read their full bios on the web listing for this event. So, Wilfred, Maria Cristina, grief is a unique experience to every individual. So I want to ask each of you to provide your own definitions of grief, and then provide us with some stories that illustrate grief based on your own experiences. Take it away, Wilfred.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for Let's Reimagine for inviting us and to really provide this space that is so needed, and so more of these type of spaces. We should continue spreading it around all of this Zoom world that we are now coming to live in. It's an important topic. It is a topic that has impacted all of our lives. And first of all, I'm going to be talking from an I standpoint. From my point of view, I'm a mental health care provider, and I first started to work in the field in hospice care for those living with HIV and AIDS in the late 80s. So during that time, as you might imagine, my first thing was going to funerals to pretty much every day, 2 and 3 times a day, for my brothers and sisters who were dying of HIV and AIDS in the Latino community and in African American community in Boston. I specifically worked in Worcester, which is a community in the central Massachusetts area. And there is then I started to define or to think about my own definition of grief and dying, which has changed throughout the years. It has been modified throughout the years and really has been coming to what I'm going to be saying now as my definition after Pulse and after my father and my mother passed away just about 5 years ago. I define it as a feeling, as a stage of my life, the stage of my being that goes through life in a metamorphosis. So it continues being changing throughout from the physical, and then I believe in the spirits that are always surrounding me and are moving me forward on a daily basis, and that they will always accompany me, even those including those brothers and sisters that in the 80s, they're still surrounding me and surround and support my work that I do every day with marginalized communities here in Puerto Rico, specifically with the LGBT community and with the elders LGBT community. So that's how I define it: a feeling and a stage of my being and of my life that continues metamorphosing or changing every day of my life.
Thank you, Wilfred. Now to you, Maria Cristina.
I am the great-granddaughter of Dominga, the granddaughter of Rosario, the daughter of Lily, the mother of Eric. My name is Maria Cristina Vlassidis Burgoa. And as you can see, I have my ancestors behind me. I've already started making an ofrenda here in my office. And it reminds me that I met Wilfred in Boston while I was working at Legal Services. It was my first job as an attorney, and I was assigned to the AIDS Law Clinic, which meant I was working in neighborhoods where Latinx people, Afro-American people, Haitian American people were being affected by the pandemic drastically, terribly. And I learned pretty quickly that more than helping them to fill out forms, for example, I would do that, but most of the time was spent listening to them. And they would share with me their sorrows, their concerns, and their joys. They would pull out photo albums that showed them, you know, dancing and all dressed up with makeup on, and they would say, "Wasn't I tears then?" And then in the same breath would ask me, how am I going to tell my 3 daughters that I'm dying? And so during the AIDS pandemic, as a Latinx queer person, just like Wilfred described, working at the Latino Health Institute in Boston, we were going to so many funerals, and we were learning stories about parents who rejected their children, their adult children, about people who were fearful and ignorant about how the virus was transmitted, about people being isolated in hospital wards that resemble the 1800s, people who had not been hugged or received any kind of loving kindness for months. And so during this pandemic, there has been a lot of triggering memories for people who survived, for relatives who lost loved ones during the AIDS pandemic. Similar things happening today about people being isolated, people being afraid to be together, having to take precautions. And the other thing that is repeating is the number among the Latino community, the Afro-American community, the poor folks, people who are the most vulnerable are the ones who are being mostly affected by COVID today. And so I come to you with experience in listening, in pastoral care, and in creating rituals that hopefully help us to process, to sit with the pain. And for me, grief is almost like undescribable, because you have as many definitions of grief as there are people on this planet, right? I've heard people say, es un vacío enorme, an enormous emptiness, un luto constante, this mourning that is constant. No hay alegría, there is no joy. I cannot enjoy the things that I used to before. Sin palabras. People of different faiths find consolation, sometimes in the belief in either the resurrection or reincarnation or the reunification with loved ones. And ritual reminds me that when we engage body, mind, and spirit, however the grief is manifesting in your life, you can process it by engaging with it. But we know that one of the aspects of grief is this shock, is this denial, is not wanting to say that it's true, not wanting to believe that it's true. And so for me, a survivor of a military dictatorship, which also brings another layer of complexity to grief, is I have family members whose bodies were never recovered. I have family members who, after 50 years, are still marching in the streets asking, where are they? ¿Dónde están? So they can give them a proper burial, no matter how old those bones are. So for me, grief comes in waves. Sometimes it comes without warning, triggered by a smell, by music, by our own body. And so there is no definition except that there is something lost, profound sense of loss, an empty spot, this change. And when it's traumatic loss, it's even more profound. So I'll stop there so we can share more later on.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. I'll ask another question to you as our faith leader in this discussion. From a spiritual perspective, what do communities need in terms of grief support? And I'm talking about both LGBTQ+, and I'm talking about Latinx.
Unconditional love, taking a step back, asking people what do they need, what helps them, right? So as a hospital chaplain, I learned to walk into a room and not have any expectations and be prepared to be told what will help them. Not to assume they want to pray, not to assume they want to read the Bible, not to assume that because somebody is Latinx, they are Catholic or Christian. I have on my altar both Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, right next to the Buddha, right next to Frida Kahlo. And for me, as a faith leader, it's important to put as many different symbols. I have a hummingbird because I know that some people believe in reincarnation, that the spirits of their loved ones come back as monarch butterflies or as hummingbirds. I'm open to that. I don't assume that I know what's going to happen in the afterlife, right? I have family members who belong to churches and faith traditions that strongly believe that when a loved one dies, you will be reunited with them. And so that grief is also mixed with this sense of joy of, oh, mi hermanito ya está con su mamá, and I am going to also meet them one day, right? And so that knowledge that we're all going to die, and depending on your faith tradition, right? Whether it's a hummingbird, whether it's heaven, whether it's reunification with a loved one, the role of the faith leader is to be open and never impose one's own belief system onto the grieving person. Allow them to say, to curse, to cry ugly, to say whatever it is, including that they're experiencing a sense of relief or guilt or shame, that it's not all about rest in peace, right? So be very attentive to what people tell you that they need, that unique, particular need from that individual. Don't assume that because we speak Spanish, we can start praying the Our Father, because that may not jive with someone who is a pagan and prays to the goddess or to nature or is an atheist. And that's what I would say. Be open, be flexible, ask people what they need, and do that. Don't impose what you think is the best for them. Don't rush them. Grief has no timeline. Certainly, it's not a linear experience. It is circular, just like the life cycle of life and death. Stop there.
Andy, may I interject, because Maria Cristina is touched upon two important topics, and as a healthcare provider, I want to say that that is an error that many healthcare providers do, is that they bring their own assumptions, their own belief pattern into the session to deal with the trauma, to deal with the grief, to deal with the process of sadness that that person may or may not have. And many times, mental health therapists receive their training thinking that is a linear, or that should be a linear process on these stages of grief. But one of the things that we need to adapt is to not, well, we need to adapt that it is understanding that it's circular, like Maria Cristina said, and that there is those 5 stages or 7 stages, whatever stages you want to believe on. It may come to you in different ways, and you may never experience one of those stages that that therapist may be forcing you to process, and that's okay. You don't have to go through all of those stages. You have to develop and to talk about your own rituals. And many times as mental health care providers, we try to enforce our own belief or what we assume that should be your stage of grief. And it should not be that way. And so we need to respect the diversity within the Latino community, Latinx community, and within the LGBT community. It is many letters of the alphabet. And like that, there's many intersectionalities. Maria Cristina has mentioned many of them, many intersectionalities that cannot be redefined in few stages, because grief is complex. Grief is circular. Grief is a process that is always there.
Wilfred, can you tell us more about your experience in terms of the spiritual care that LGBTQ plus elders in Puerto Rico are needing right now, and how those needs are being met?
Well, Andy, that's a question that has a lot of connotations to it here in Puerto Rico. For those who are joining us today, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. We are mandated by the United States on how we should be responded to our own issues, from the economical to responses to environmental issues that have impacted us, like the hurricanes, like the earthquakes, COVID now. And so we haven't had a time to really process what has gone in Puerto Rico. I know Maria Cristina has visited us, and I'm so thankful that she comes, and it has been at the perfect times for me personally. And other individuals like her have visited Puerto Rico at the perfect times when I feel so burned, because it is a lot of work. There are not that many individuals that work with the intersectionalities from a mental health standpoint or from a spiritual standpoint here in Puerto Rico. They only talk about specific religious aspect and not the spiritual aspects. I'm generalizing because of my experience that I have had with the organization that I work, which is called Waves Ahead. Although we focus on the elder and the LGBT elder, we really have seen the need when individuals see us and when they see us doing interventions in the community to come to us. After the hurricanes, I had the pleasure to work with Intersections International, an organization, an NGO that works with the spiritual diversity in our community. And they came to Puerto Rico and they wanted to go to Vieques, which is an island municipality. And I remember Reverend Julie Johnson Staples going with us to the streets, and I was serving as an interpreter and translator for her when we were doing these groups in the community, these groups for just debriefing, for them to allow a moment to talk about their loss, to talk about their grief, to talk about their impact that the hurricanes have had in their lives. And it was very impactful to see that although we were specifically focusing on certain houses, when we were talking to them outside of the house or in the living room area, more neighbors started to come and started to be a rejoicing of talking about life and about grief, our grief as a community. And from a house that was only 2 or 3 people lived there, it ended up being 15 people and 20 something people gathering and talking about it because they were not giving that time to talk about anything, to talk about their loss and to talk about their grief. And so it is important to provide those spaces without an agenda, to provide those spaces when you listen. And when you, as Maria Cristina said, don't come with your notions and just go into the space to just listen and open it up to whatever they want to say and do. One of the houses that we visited was near the beach, and the lady, a 78-year-old lesbian who lived by herself in this house, always loved to do mandalas in the sand with the water. And for her, it was very healing. And she wanted to do it with us. And that was very powerful, just to allow her to take us to the area of the beach where she normally goes and by herself, to bring people with her, to share that sacred space for her with us. And the community members started to talk to her about that practice that she did, that ritual she did. And now when I visit Vieques, I always visit her, and they're always doing now twice a week mandalas there and doing their ritual as a community in their healing process. So it is a beautiful time. You need to embrace that and don't go with an agenda. You know, I understand that time is always of an essence, like everybody says, but really in those instances, there's no time. All the time, it is what is needed. So yeah, I'll leave it at that so we can continue the conversation.
I like that example of the mandala in the sand. It's something that Maria Cristina brought up earlier, the importance of ritual. And I wanted to bring us back to the overarching theme of Reimagine's fall season, which is grief, growth, and action. We are trying in many ways to encourage our participants at these events and these experiences to take small, sweet steps to transform that grief, not to get rid of it. We can't get rid of it, but there are opportunities to take that loss and to develop it into something different. It's not that this idea that everything's going to be better, but there are opportunities to grow from this, not for everyone and not at all times. And I'm curious to hear from both of you, and I'll start with you, Maria Cristina. What are other examples of small, sweet steps that people might be able to take who are experiencing grief or loss?
Thanks, Andy. Because you asked, Wilfred, specifically about the elders in Puerto Rico, I don't want to leave out the children. So before I go into that, I want to say that death is something that not everyone is comfortable talking about, right? Mm. Especially with children. And we need to develop language that is appropriate so that children can, from a very young age, begin to know life cycles, begin to experience family gatherings where they are remembering an ancestor or someone that they love that died. So in my church, I not only make my individual altar in my office for my family members, but beginning tomorrow, I invite the community, not just church members, but anyone in the community, to come to the church and build their altar. And I know that this year, we couldn't build enough altars for all the COVID deaths and all the deaths at the hands of, violence, police violence, racist violence, violence against vulnerable people, vulnerable populations, particularly people of color. And so one thing that I do is I tell stories, I read books. This Sunday, I'm going to be reading a bilingual book called A Gift for Abuelita, Un Regalo para Abuelita. And it shows the Mexican tradition of the Day of the Dead. And some people have this strange notion that because it's so colorful and because people go to the graveside and eat and dance and sing, that it's not painful, that it's not mournful, but it is. It's just more complex because it has layers of cultural traditions that are thousands of years old, where people saw the skeleton as a reflection of themselves and considered death part of life. And all the poetry and all the music and the wonderful illustrations, pre-Hispanic stuff, right? Before the Spanish conquista, we had our traditions that were earth-based, that would be called pagan today, but just wanting to bring up that we can do that still today with the new generations, that it's not only thinking about death when someone is an elder, but the other part is that there is a special day for the angelitos, the little angels, for children who die, and there are specific funeral rites that are offered to the community so that especially the parents can begin to allow themselves to take in the reality of the loss of a child, because usually we expect that our children will bury us, not the other way around. And so I want to mention this because there are so many things we can do with the children, whether it's coloring a butterfly, then filling in the butterfly with the name of maybe a pet that they lost, or maybe a grandparent or great-grandparent or a friend. So look for stories that allow children to understand death, not in a scary way, that allow parents to open up the conversation and not think that they're going to jinx something, that it's bad luck to talk about death. Some people don't, it's taboo. You don't talk about it because if you talk about it, it's going to happen to you. But rituals like the Day of the Dead or All Souls Day or on November 1st, whatever your tradition, whether it's placing a single flower next to the photograph of a loved one or lighting a single candle, involving movement, involving your body helps to allow you to breathe, to let it out, to let that energy out from your body. That is why in Puerto Rico, in Colombia, in Chile, in so many places, we used to have traditions called the baquine, or a ceremony for this little angel that involved putting the little angel on the kitchen table and the community coming around and children playing games, eating candy, elders telling stories, singing and dancing and drinking until all hours of the night and drinking hot chocolate. And everyone brings a little bit, whether it's a cracker or a fruit. There is this sense that you are held by the community. And with the creation of the funeral industry, that was pushed right to the funeral home and not in our own home. But we can still do the rituals in our homes that allow for us to honor memories, to remember, and to grieve in community. That is so, so important. So I wanted to mention that there are special rituals for children who die, but there are also books and resources to help our children, the new generation, to understand that what they are feeling is okay, and to understand, the different cultural traditions that help us to process the loss. And that's a gift that we can give to our communities, whether we use papel picado, that's a symbol of this life being so ephemeral, flowers, candles, or just a simple drawing, or just invoking the name. There is a tradition in South and Central America where you call out the name of the dead and everyone answers presente, presente, presente. They are here, they are present, they are not forgotten. And now I forgot the original question.
You answered it. You provided so many wonderful examples of actions and steps, particularly around ritual, that people can take to really face the grief. And now Wilfred.
And Andy,
Yes.
before you ask the next question,
Yes.
as a gay Latino man, gay Puerto Rican man, gay Boricua, it was interesting that I started, since we opened our first center in San Juan, I decided to begin the tradition of queering it up, the Day of the Dead. And I'm just going to mention this simply because I still get the slack for it, for celebrating that tradition that is among us, and really remembering all the LGBT people and all of our friends and family allies to us, who will always be here with us in spirit, who their spirit will always live within us. And we do a big celebration and we dance Bombi Plena. This year we're going to be, last year and this year is online because of COVID, but we are celebrating it, and I queer up all the traditions because we need to continue using it as an education tool for all individuals to know that those individuals, that spirit is within us and moves our work and our lives. So, and one of the other things that Maria Cristina reminded me was when my dad died. He was a famous painter here in Puerto Rico. He always said to me that when he died, he wanted to have art exhibition near his casket, and that he wanted to be in his old San Juan. So I, interesting enough, asked to have his casket and the wake inside the gallery that he loved for so much. And for 60 years, he had the art gallery in Old San Juan. And I had to go to the Institute of Culture here in Puerto Rico to ask permission to do that because the funeral homes did not allow that. And so I needed, because he was a national treasure, I needed to ask the Institute of Culture to do that. And I was able to honor him, having the wake in the gallery and then walking around the street with a band, with music, jazz, with cabezudos, which are these big head individuals in festivals that are part of our festivals around the city of Puerto Rico, all the towns. So leading the march with azucenas, which is the tuberose, for the smell, because that scent of that flower is so potent. And we walked all around Old San Juan, around all the people. And the slack that I got after that, it was unbelievable. So we must honor the diversity. We must honor. And really, I was doing that ritual not only for me and for my family, but for him, because he wanted it. And I understood that his spirit was with me, and it still is with me.
Wilfred, I love that you turned your father's funeral into a fiesta that really summed up his life. I want to ask you specifically about Waves Ahead and your work as a mental health professional, this idea again of taking small, sweet steps. And I was reminded of a practice that you do yourself and that you offer to others that you shared with me. And it has to do with something that's very specific to living on an island and the beach. Maybe you know what I'm talking about.
The cleansing. You meant the cleansing?
I'm talking about dirt therapy or
oh, okay.
therapy.
So there's two things that we do here and that I do. Let's continue with me. I hold that ritual of cleansing with the seawater and with the and really with the ocean and with the sand. So I really still do that. But dirt therapy is something that uses grounding techniques with mindfulness techniques and the dirt and the la tierra de donde vinimos, the dirt, la tierra that really sees us and that holds us, and that we need to nurture that. And that energy that has from the sand, from the la tierra, from the dirt, really is very powerful. And what we do is we provide not only the techniques on how to use your hands with the dirt to be able to do some grounding techniques with that, but also you're harvesting food by planting seeds when you're done with that ritual of mindfulness and of grounding. So it's a matter of how to also grow your own home garden and being and putting precise meaning to each plant that you do plant or that you just use to release your stressors, to release your anxiety, to release your anger and your maybe sadness into the sand, because we believe, I believe, that the dirt and the sand can absorb your energy, and in return, it will give you new energy to re-energize your work every day and your emotions, to transfer them into positive energy.
I love that. I think what I want to do now is, Zubin, if you could remove spotlights and we can all go into gallery view. The questions are starting to come in on the chat, and there's one from Chris. And Chris, you are welcome if you want to unmute and ask the question directly if you would like.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. My question is that Wilfred was talking about queering up some of those traditional fiestas or celebrations of life rather than, just kind of the mourning piece. And I'm wondering, how did you queer those up? Like, in what ways would you queer up those traditions, or have you seen done in other cultures or other settings?
Wilfred, you're on mute.
It has been so long with Zoom and we still don't get the unmute and mute. Apologize for that. Well, we queer it up in a way. Bombi Plena is a very gender specific dance steps. And so many of those dance steps are done with the opposite gender that we are taught or that we grow up thinking about. So the female roles are usually danced in our celebration at Waves Ahead by males or by any individual who wants to dance, no matter if they're male or female, whatever you want to dance the role, you do it. And you dress however you want. We welcome you. That's first thing. The second thing that we do is that we not only honor those who have brothers and sisters of the LGBTQ plus community that have died, but we also teach about who they were, because some individuals there may not know who it was Soraya Santiago, who died in September of 2020 and who always is with us. Soraya Santiago, it was the first transgender individual who did it in the 70s here in Puerto Rico. And it was the first female who have transitioned legally and physically, and was married and continue putting a lot of first. So if you wanna know more about her, you can see the documentary Mala Mala. She's one of the elders who is showcasing that documentary, Mala Mala. And you can read her books. She has 2 books of gender dysphoria out there. But just like Soraya, we also honor the angels of Pulse. And we teach individuals who are there who may not know who those individuals were. We talk about it, and that's how we queer up. And the decorations and the papel picado, we use the pride colors and we use the flags colors in all of the decoration. If you want to see our newest celebration, is going to be online on November 1st, and it has an explanation about what it is. And then we have music, and we are doing a creative art session during the session that is queering it up. So
Maria Cristina, I'm going to kick this to you. I'm wondering if you might have some examples of queering up rituals, ceremonies, particularly around the life cycle.
Well, I think that asking me to do something, I hope I don't lose you.
What's that?
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, great. There was a moment there where I got one of those signs on the screen and I panicked. But I was going to mention that the Day of the Dead, October 31st, November 1st, is not the only opportunity to remember our beloved who have died. We also build altars on Transgender Remembrance Day, for example. And just like Wilfred has explained, we teach about the people that we're honoring because it's so important to name them, once again, to make them present, to honor them, and for the community to come and appreciate that their life matters, right? Queering it up means that if you are used to seeing an altar with only religious icons, you might include, images of people who are transgender, bisexual, identify as two-spirit, queer, torcidos, whoever that may be in your culture, in your community. For me, always having an image of local transgender youth who we had we've lost to violence is so important, not because it's something that we want to keep remembering the pain. Yes, and we also want to remind people that there's so many transgender people around the world who die every year at the hands of transphobic, violent people, police, government, but also just people who hate. And this is an opportunity for us to educate, to promote not just tolerance, but really embracing, and every church, every community center becoming a welcoming community, a safe and brave space, every school, so that we can stop the bullying that happens in the locker room, but also there's bullying, in churches, in families, right? Queering it up means we lift up the value, the preciousness of those lives, and remind people it's not just a number. It's not just an anonymous candle, because sometimes we don't even know the names of the people. They lived and they breathed and they had dreams and aspirations, and they came from families that sometimes they were the first to reject them, churches that rejected them, people who condemned them. Even in death, we can reclaim our queer, two-spirit, trans siblings and give them a place of honor in our home altars, in our churches, in our community centers. Bring them an offering, believing that energy is never lost. In this universe, we are made of particles of stars, right? When we think about what we are made up of, Wilfred mentioned water. All the elements are within us, and we have a spirit. We have a spirit that longs to be free. And right now, the most vulnerable, transgender people, two-spirit people, they are not experiencing true liberation. And we have to promote that, not wait until they die to promote their worthiness, their precious life. Keep saying their name and keep saying that their lives matter. That's why rituals are so important, because they transcend time and individuals. It becomes almost a spiritual experience, a religious experience. For us, it is healing, because we keep reading it, we keep watching it, and to a certain extent, we become numb, because we expect that every year we have hundreds of names, and that's only the official list of people that have been reported to the authorities. But when we think about the thousands who die and hundreds of thousands who survive with injuries, the children and the youth who are trans, who are getting hatred from their own families, from their teachers, from their communities, who don't understand that they, in fact, have the independence and authority to make choices. Even at 7 and 8 years old, can say, I do not feel right in this body. Help me so that I can become whole, so that I can feel whole, and that I can thrive, right? And share my gifts with everyone. So for me, there is always an opportunity to honor, not only in death, but also this generation that is growing up and needing our support, so that they don't become a casualty in an anonymous candle in some street corner.
Amen, amen. Does anyone,
Amen, yashe, ashe.
Does anyone else have questions for Maria Cristina and Wilfred? Diana, Greg, Charlie, Ellen, and those who I can't see? You are welcome to unmute and ask a question. Just let me know.
While people are getting their thoughts together to ask the question, I wanted to add that for us at Waves Ahead was so important to develop a space that when you come to the center, if you want to take a moment to do your own ritual, we develop a meditation room that you can go in, close yourself in, and just meditate or just do whatever you would like for your own peace of mind, for your own nurturance in that space. Due to COVID, we're using it also to televise our mindfulness support groups and yoga meditation, but otherwise, when the time comes that more people come into our center, there is that space for them. And in Cabo Rojo, we have a space near the beach that you can go and do your own rituals with a monument that is celebrating diversity. And we did it near the beach, so in that way you can celebrate diversity, but also celebrating life and also the spirits that are within us.
So I have a question. Maria and Wilfred, thank you so much. You have really blessed my heart. So my question is slightly a concern. So with Dia de los Muertos coming and Dia de los Fieles Difuntos coming and Dia de, just to remember, there's been so many people that have approached me and they're concerned because they feel like their heart wants to, they love the altar, the ofrenda, the tablos, they want to create something, especially with this year of COVID. They want to create something, but they are so afraid because they feel like it's cultural appropriation. And I don't feel like it is. I feel like they have a place to let their heart breathe, regardless of who we are. And this is an opportunity. So how would you approach that? When they're so concerned, they're really genuine concerned that because we have so much racial division right now, and they're like, I'm white, I'm black, I'm Asian, I'm not Latino, I don't have a right. How would you approach that? Anybody can answer.
I don't know.
So-
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Diana, gracias por tu pregunta. What a great question, because I'm from Chile. I'm not from Mexico. And here I am building altars. But as you can tell, and as I mentioned before, it's an amalgamation of all the icons and images that I have accumulated over the years that have been gifts or that have represented some kind of healing for me. Flowers are universal. Nobody gets to say only this, culture can bring flowers, right? Wilfred mentioned azucenas, traditional in Puerto Rico. In Mexico, it's cempasúchil, the marigolds. For me, yellow roses for my grandmother. Pictures of your loved ones. That's universal. You bring the image of the person you want to honor. Candles are universal, right? We're not trying to copy. We're not trying to appropriate. We are trying to bring to the table whatever it is. I see that you have a beautiful weaving that says Ecuador. What are the traditions in Ecuador that you could bring to share those things that you have experienced in your family, in your neighborhood? As immigrants, we are rich in stories and experiences because when we get here, we feel such a sense of loss, right? And it's hard to find those spaces to recreate those traditions and those rituals that brought us some sense of belonging, some sense of we are held, we're not alone. So whether it was a ritual that had to do with the sun, whether it was planting a tree, what did your family do? Was it just a simple water next to that photograph, that old black and white photograph. Maybe it was an elaborate tablecloth made of crochet, like for my grandmother. There's nothing better than to bring to her altar those doilies, because she loved to crochet those doilies. Nobody has, an appropriation of what you bring to your ofrenda. It's not about copying this or that. It's what gives you the sense of peace, of connection. Maybe it's the simplest one rose right next to your window when you see the sun come up or when you see the moon come up, that connects you to that special someone. Maybe you don't need a physical object, and it's music or poetry. So I'm going to say to you that, if you come to the ritual thinking you have to have the calavera, you have to have the marigold, no, you bring what makes sense to you. A cempasúchil is beautiful, and we have people in my congregation from Michoacán and from other parts of Mexico that will lead the service. They will lead the service because they will do it in Spanish, in Nahuatl, and in English. I won't do that part, but I will build my altar for my abuelita, and I will use the yellow roses, and I will show everyone her beautiful photographs, and I will bring chalk and pens and crayons and pencils because she was a school teacher, and that's the way I honor her. And I will bring the best teacup that I can find and make her a cup of tea, because in Chile we have a tradition. In the afternoon, we have what we call un tecito, la hora de once. We take a break, and it's between lunch and dinner, and it's la hora de once. And my grandmother always made the best tea with cinnamon, and that's what I will make for her. So I would say, give yourself permission to explore in your own experience, your own cultural tradition, and feel free to be creative. There are things in my altars that come up that are new and creative ways for me, because whether it's queering that altar, I will bring yarn with the trans flag colors. And that to me, next to my grandmother, means I am crossing the border all over again, right? I am not allowing division to exist. I am authentic in that I bring my own experience, I bring my own colors and traditions. And I also say thank you when people allow me to get a gift from them, and I will place it on my altar. And if that happens to be a sugar skull that is made in Mexico, I will show it proudly, because I will always remember learning about El Día de los Muertos. And there was Octavio Paz saying, in Europe and the United States, people are afraid to even touch the word, allow the word death to touch their lips. In Mexico, not only does it touch our lips, we swallow it whole, just like that sugar skull. So anyway, I would say, yes, be careful about cultural appropriation and trying to copy someone. Be authentic. You will realize that in your own family, in your own cultural background, you have many gifts, colorful gifts that you can bring to your altar.
Yeah, and I think I've tried to encourage them to do that by teaching what we do in Ecuador, but I want to give them permission, because I can give you permission, but they have to release that feeling of guilt that they carry. And it might not even be themselves. It might be from someone else telling them it's cultural appropriation, because I've heard it. So I think it's a beautiful tradition. And I think giving them an opportunity to say, look into your culture. Maybe you were never taught, maybe your family didn't do something, but if you feel led in your heart to do something, then look into your culture and do what you feel that is letting your heart breathe and letting you remember and honor the people that you want to make it for. So thank you for that.
Last year, Diana, we taught individuals how to use a shoebox to turn it into an altar and decorate it, because we were having a lot of altars in their own homes. And what's interesting was that we did the altar for, as an example, to remember dogs that are so powerful. And there were many, the companions of many individuals during COVID months of restriction of you staying at home, and some of them have died. It was a beautiful experience. And I did get that same question. Are you allowing us to take over that culture? And I'm like, no, it is, like Maria Cristina said, a beautiful experience that you can make it your own, and you can celebrate the spirits and those individuals that are angels now among us. And so you can celebrate however you want. And the other thing I was going to mention is that there's so many different celebrations in the internet that you can learn from different cultures. I learned from my friend from Thailand that when you remember the individual, you put a chocolate in your mouth and you savor the sweetness of the chocolate to remember the sweetness of that individual. And so I celebrated. I don't like chocolate too much. I have to disclose that. And it's not a commercial for chocolate, but I do eat chocolate now when I celebrate the lives of those individuals that are within me and with me all the time.
Thank you, Wilfred. There's a question from Carmen. Carmen, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, hola. My mother passed very recently, and something that I was that came out from my heart is we don't share the same religion. She's Catholic. I was raised Catholic, but I'm no longer Catholic. And when she first passed, like I totally went to her belief system. And because at that moment, right when she died, it was about her and her belief system. And now that a few months have passed, now I'm gonna make it mine and just take, I'm like what we call in Puerto Rico, sada. I'm a sada. I take from many different, not only spiritual traditions, but also cultures, and I make very hybrid altars. I mean, I'm planning to make a very hybrid altar for my mother. But when I did it officially and right when she died, I did it strictly like Catholic. Yeah, that it was a comment. Thank you.
Gracias, Carmencita.
Gracias.
Abrazo.
Abrazo.
We have another question, I think, from Carlos. Carlos.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Wilfred, and thank you, Maria Cristina. I work in Washington State, and I've been working with hospice for 16 years. I'm in a new role right now, and we have a smaller community, a Latino community, than most other states. And when we do provide hospice services to the Latino community, clinicians come to me because they hear of Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and the celebrations, and they think that Latinos in general are more accepting of death. And I say, I think is that, we're afraid like any other culture. We're afraid of death, but we're so afraid that we laugh about it, and that's why we, so we can accept it more. And I don't know if that's true or not, but wondering if you had any thoughts. And I ask that because they see families struggling, they see families fighting, even more in some cases than other patients who are not Latino.
As a mental health care provider, I would say to you, Carlos, and thank you for the question, is that there has to be some understanding from your clinicians, from your nurses, from your doctors, that there has to be a celebration of the intersectionalities, and also not to bring the assumptions that they may or may not have. But in the case and in the question that you're saying, it seems that they're bringing their own assumptions, like saying that the Day of the Dead is only for Mexicans, is an assumption. And there has to be some supervision. There has to be some conversations about those notions that that individual may have as a professional, as a care provider, as a volunteer even. And it has to be a open conversation about that, about the stages in the hospice care, and added to the procedure to really be able to not assume that the Latino, that I'm assuming myself, that is you, come to talk about all the Latinos and all the Latino culture, because although I'm Puerto Rican, I may not know all the details or everything about the Latino cultures, and it's a wrong assumption. And so we need to really have an open conversation. And like Maria Cristina said, books, children's books, even with adults, are the best way to talk about these topics. I used to use children books to talk with adults in therapy about the topics that are very hard to talk about. Maria Cristina, if you want to add.
Yeah, thanks, Wilfred. That's a great question, because in an effort to become culturally competent, many white professionals will go overboard and latch on to like the latest, right? And they see Coco and Disney, and they learn about the Day of the Dead. They see that in states like California, where there's so many Mexican people, Central American people. It is celebrated. It is found in bakeries and supermarkets. Don't assume that everyone is going to accept it. There are families where even, when their loved one is dying, especially if you're providing hospice care, they don't want the word death mentioned. They might believe that it hates that, the death is going to come, quicker even if you mention it. You shouldn't. There are people whose beliefs are not understood by the majority, by society, whether it's voodoo or whether it's espiritismo, whether it's santeria. There are stereotypical images that people carry around, and they, assume that, oh, this person is from Cuba or Puerto Rico. They, might be into santeria and not into Day of the Dead from Mexico. And don't assume anything about anyone just because they identify as Latino, Hispanic, or from a certain country in Central South America or the Caribbean. There are traditions that have been maligned just by the media, by Hollywood, and people are reluctant to open up and even tell a healthcare provider, a therapist, a nurse, a doctor, the hospice chaplain, what their true belief system is, because they have been burned, they have been rejected or seen as ignorant or cultish or devilish, satanic or whatever. So being very, very, very careful, knowing that not everyone might be ready to disclose what their true belief system is, and don't assume that because you had an easy time learning about the Day of the Dead and you see it all over the media, that other people are going to embrace it. They might be scared of it. There are people in my congregation who still have a hard time when someone makes an altar with a skull. They're like, ooh, I don't want to see the skull. That's scary. But they don't say the same thing, when they see the skull for Halloween. So it's complicated. it's complicated as you know, chaplains, healthcare providers, you know, pastors, ministers, community people. We need to always ask and take the cue from the people, from the individual, from the family, and go from there. Don't assume that because the Day of the Dead is so popular, everyone is going to, yay, celebrate and build an altar. There are families that see altars. If you are Jehovah's Witness, you don't want anything in your home, right? Because that's against their beliefs. They don't celebrate birthdays. They're not going to build an altar for the Day of the Dead, even if they're Mexican, because their faith tradition will not allow it. If you are Latter-day Saints, you're going to have a very different setup in your home than someone with a different spiritual tradition. And we know that Espiritismo is different. There are different kinds of Espiritismo. And when people hear Spiritism, they think Ouija board, three-leg table, you know, calling the spirit. And in Puerto Rico, there are different ways of connecting with your ancestors, with the spirit in the tradition of Espiritismo. And I just wanted to mention that because it's multi-layered, it's complicated, it's easy to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time because it's our own desire to be helpful and bring materials and resources to the person and give them options, right, that are culturally sensitive. But we ourselves, Latinx people, have to practice cultural humility because within our own culture, there is so much diversity. Let us not, as Latinx people or people within a multicultural community, fall into, you know, the trap of assuming something that it's a very delicate moment. People are grieving. People are sad. You know, people are on the brink of losing it because finances, you know, they're thinking about finances. They're thinking about, you know, having the person at home, but not being able to take care of the person at home. People undocumented, being afraid to reach out to those professionals that can be helpful, and being alone at home caring for their loved ones. How can we reach out, you know, to the people who cannot even make it to an appointment, to therapy, or to a hospital, or to request hospice resources and support when they're afraid because of their immigration status? Let us think about people on the margins, the people who are invisible. How can we help them, right? Let us not forget them. They're there. They're part of our communities too.
Maria Cristina, Wilfred, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your grace, for your passion. We are so grateful to you. And I want to thank everyone who showed up tonight. Particularly, I want to thank those who asked questions and participated. We'll be sending out a recording of this to everyone who registered, and please share it out. Come back to the next table talk on Indigenous paradigms of grief. That'll be in November. Come to other Reimagine programs. And I want to wish you all buenas noches, good night, and I hope to see you all soon.
Wilfred, te quiero mucho. Un abrazo.
Igual.
Gracias, Andy. Thank you, everyone.
Un abrazo. Chao, chao. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.